So good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us. We know that there's at least a half dozen other events in the State House today, so we really appreciate your presence at this one, and we'll try to be as brief as possible. Just to give a quick overview, we're going to today present our caucus legislative priorities. We're also going to issue our position on LEOBOR, and then we'll take questions from the press. So to get us started right away, I want to introduce my co-chair, Rep. Felix, who will go over our priorities.
Caucus, and thank you everyone for being here today. We appreciate your presence, and thank you for all the members. I know you always all have committees and things, other places to be, so thank you for being here. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Representative Felix, and I am the co-chair of the Rhode Island Black, Latino, Indigenous, Asian American, and Pacific Islander Caucus, RIBLIA, along with Chair Acosta. And we are thrilled today to present the caucus's 2024 legislative priorities for this session. Our caucus represents a diverse coalition of lawmakers dedicated to enacting positive changes and improving the lives of all residents in our state. Currently, we are proud to comprise 21 members, 14 in the House and 7 in the Senate, and collectively we represent 18% of both chambers. The array of bills that caucus will be advocating for this session underscores our unwavering dedication to uplifting the marginalized, defending the oppressed, and striving for a fair and equitable society for all Rhode Islanders. While numerous other legislative bills have been introduced that will positively impact our communities due to the capacity constraints, as we are a part-time legislature, as you all know, we needed to prioritize and selectively choose the bills that we were going to be advocating for in this session. And the categories of those bills are housing and homelessness supports for communities and small businesses, support for all students, civil rights and public safety, and health and wellness reforms. Our complete policy agenda, along with the links to all the proposed bills, are available online. And some of the examples of the bills that we will be supporting are as follows. So, as Chair Acosta mentioned, reforming our position in terms of the reform of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, which Acosta will discuss shortly. Legislation sponsored by Senator Mack and Representative Cruz to establish attendance Bill of Rights. Legislation sponsored by Senator Cano and Caldwell and Representative Caldwell to mandate free breakfasts and lunches for all elementary and secondary schools. Kids in public schools, and legislation sponsored by myself and Chair Acosta to reform the use of restricted housing, also known as solitary confinement. These legislative priorities, among others, underscore our commitment to addressing the most pressing needs of our communities and advancing policies that will foster a more equitable and prosperous future for all of our residents. I want to take a moment and thank the Working Families Party, as well as Black Lives Matter RI PAC, for supporting and endorsing these priorities, as well as our position in terms of LEOBOR. So now I will hand it over to Chair Acosta.
The bills on our priority list were relatively uncontroversial. It was pretty easy to build that list and to build consensus in our group. LEOBOR falls under a different category. We, as a group, spent hours deliberating this particular issue and have settled on 4 priorities that we expect will be in any bill that folks expect our support from. And so these 4 priorities are as follows. The first is an annual reporting provision in any LEOBOR reform put before us. Currently, there is no centralized, systematic way of collecting data either on LEOBOR or on police misconduct in our state. It is so bad that our legal counsel and our policy team has to resort to performing Google searches or looking through archives in local newspapers, who I want to give a shout out because without them, we would not have anything, in order to look for cases of police misconduct. The act of not collecting data is a choice. And without that data, we don't have an informed public, or frankly, even an informed General Assembly to take action on issues like this. And so we know that we need annual reporting, and we demand that it be included in any reform proposed. The second priority that we have is a full removal of the gag order. Now, this is pretty simple, but this is an issue of public trust. It's often the case that the leadership in police departments wants to speak. In some cases, the accused officers want to speak on their behalf, and they're unable to because of the way that the current law is written. And so we expect any law to have a full removal of the gag order and allow folks to speak on the issues in front of them so that they're not misinterpreted as tacit consent for misconduct. The third priority is to raise the summary suspension to 14 days. One of the myths that we often hear, and that we can't dispel because of the lack of the reporting mechanism, is that many of the cases that are heard before LEOBOR panels are ticky-tacky fouls, simple misconduct around issues like uniform violations or tardiness. And so by taking those out and making LEOBOR what it's supposed to be, a panel for issues of egregious misconduct, we expect that we will address most of these minor infractions and that they will be removed from a place where they don't belong, and they never were intended to belong. The final priority actually came from these hours of deliberation, and it is that we have clear language that mandates that LEOBOR run concurrent with any criminal investigation or trial. We had a litmus test in our group. Many of us come from the urban core, and specifically from Pawtucket and Providence, two communities that have had 3 very high-profile cases of police misconduct in the last few years. None of the reforms proposed would pass the litmus test of being able to discipline and terminate the police officers in those 3 cases. And that is because, under current law, LEOBOR takes second place to a criminal investigation. We believe that it is often the case that someone should and could be fired from their job for conduct unbecoming of someone in that job, regardless of whether or not it is criminal conduct. And so for that reason, we have this 4th priority. Now, I want to underscore the historical significance of this moment. So, as my co-chair introduced some of the history of our caucus, one thing that becomes clear is that we are now moving from our nascent stage to our mature stage. The caucus is less than 30 years old. For most of its history, it had just a handful of members, single digits, often operating in silos, being champions of their own causes, struggling to bring unity. Today, that is not the case. There are 21 of us. And since 2020, when we had that number, we represent a diverse set of communities and quite a large age range. We are the children, the grandchildren, in some cases from my colleagues in the 20s, the great-grandchildren of the civil rights generation. And we heed the lessons from that era. Most importantly, solidarity. And so what we are saying today is that 17 of our 21 members have committed to expressing solidarity over these 4 priorities. I want to give a shout out and be very clear about my appreciation for Rep. Alsata, Rep. Batista, Rep. Cruz, Rep. Diaz, Rep. Felix, Rep. Giraldo, Rep. Henrys, Rep. Morales, Rep. Sanchez, Rep. Stewart, Senator Brito, Senator Cano, Senator Gu, Senator Mack, Senator Quesada, and Senator Ujifusa, who have all committed to standing together on this issue, no longer operating in silence. This is the first time that this caucus does this, and I hope it's not the last. I also want to give a shout out to some of our allies who have already joined our cause, including Rep. Kislak, Rep. Lombardi, Rep. McGaugh, and Rep. Tansey. And we welcome the support of other senators and other reps to join us in this fight. I want to close by coming back to this civil rights movement that birthed many of us, and a poem from a champion of that era, a fighter and poet, the late great Muhammad Ali, who on a visit to a college campus, a small liberal arts school about an hour north from here, sister college of my own alma mater. When he visited, he heard chants from folks in the audience saying, "Champ, give us a poem." And he would go on to deliver what was at that time the shortest poem in the English language. He took his hand up and he raised it and he said, "Me, we." And that's the declaration that this caucus makes today. So with that, we have press releases available for members of the press. We have a chart that outlines the 4 priorities that we've articulated today as part of LEOBOR, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
with regard to the Daniel Dolan situation in Pawtucket, Pawtucket police officer Dolan was engaged in a second series of criminality post the egregious shooting in West Greenwich. It involved a felony threatening charge to which we were all treated to the videotapes where he used a number of some pretty despicable language to threaten fellow police officers. Pawtucket Mayor Grebian allowed him stay on the force despite the fact that he was charged with a felony. There's confusion over the reading of that law. Under the attorneys that we consulted with, Officer Grebian would have had the opportunity to suspend him because he was not formally charged. In fact, he wasn't even processed for months. He sat out there in legal limbo. Will you clarify that, if you will, that stipulation so that officers who are accused at the police level don't get to hide out from the criminal process in order to stay fully employed and fully on the dole, if you will, of the city of Pawtucket?
Sure. Without going too much into the particularities of one case, and I'll note that I purposely avoided naming some officers this time as I've done in the past. I will say that it's our belief that if our 4 priorities make the reform bill that gets passed by both chambers this year, then we wouldn't have had what happened in the Pawtucket case.
Fair enough.
Other questions?
One last one.
Sure.
Right now, you've got a bill that was passed by the Senate that many activists consider weak tea. And then there's a number of bills in the House under current consideration, a couple of them by members of your, promoted by members of your caucus. What type of action will the House take with regard to the Senate bill if in fact there's an attempt at reconciliation of the bills?
Sure, and I appreciate you bringing up this question because, frankly, I think I alluded to solidarity, but didn't quite have to articulate what that would mean in practice. And so it's our expectation that unless a bill brought to the floor meets all 4 priorities, that those folks who have expressed solidarity for our position will either vote no or walk out of a vote that does not include those 4 issues. Now, in order, as you know, in order for a bill to pass, it has to pass both chambers. Now, we passed a bill in the Senate that meets 3 of the 4 priorities, not all 4. Understanding that we still have to determine our position, but that there was going to be negotiations taking place between the House and Senate leadership on what a final form of the bill would look like, which are underway right now. Part of why we're hosting this press conference at this very moment is that so we are on the record expressing what our priorities are, so that they are aware of what our priorities are, and so that we can try to make sure that they're included in these negotiations. Whatever happens, the Senate will have to vote again, unless the House passes the exact same version of the Senate, which is not what we've been led to believe. Then we will have to vote at least twice in the Senate chamber. We'll have to vote for whatever they amend our version that we passed to be, and the concurrent passage of the House bill. And so I expect that will give us several bites of the apple at making our case. And should we need to, we also expect to submit floor amendments should the bill brought to the floor not meet the criteria that we've set out.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. If not, I want to thank everybody for coming again and thank all of my colleagues for being here. I know we have some other places that we have the rush to be, so appreciate y'all and I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thank you.